morning. It's great to see all of you here today, and we welcome everyone who's gathered in any of our rooms, and also to those of you who are gathered online. Maddie, thank you for reading that for us this morning. And today we're going to talk about those people. Y'all know those people, who those people are? That should be a lot of fun, shouldn't it? So we're going to talk about that today because I think how we learn to deal with those people really is going to be helpful to how we learn how to deal with what's actually right in front of us. And so that's what I'm going to try and illustrate for us or deal with today. So our vision that we've been talking about, what happens when we reach people and help them walk with God, as we've been saying that it results as you walk with God and I walk with God, that we experience life with God together, and then we say very clearly for the world. So I'm going to try to draw this with some kind of three-dimensional setting. So we're going to start kind of as a road. It's going to start here wide. We're going to kind of go towards this space. Does that look three-dimensional? So you kind of like, we're going to walk this way towards it. Make sense? So if you're like a doodler, this is how I think about things. And there's some important things or places where things happen. And something needs to happen right here, and then something needs to happen sort of down here. Okay, so this is kind of what we're going to be dealing with, this trajectory towards this life with God for and I assume y'all know that's a world, right? So you can just leave that right there. So this is where we're sitting and landing, and this is everything. This is the thing that is the most difficult for us to wrestle with, to understand, and the reason is because of what happened in the beginning. People talk about it as the fall or sin entered the world, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that other than to say that it happened. It happened. It's the condition of our world. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created all that we see. He invited human beings into this in order to contribute, to continue creating, to be a part of what God had established. The Hebrew term that was given was the term shalom. The more modern version is what people call human flourishing, where people sort of learn how to get along and enjoy one another, but really it's even more than that. Shalom is where everything is rightly related to everything else. In the beginning, we were rightly related to God. We were fully seen by Him, fully known by Him. We walked with Him, we enjoyed Him, and then we had a task. We had a right relationship with one another. We had a right relationship with the work of our hands, with our calling on this in this world, what we were to contribute. And when sin entered, it broke everything. Sin separated our relationship that we had with God. It separated us from one another. It separated us from the meaning and the purpose of our work and how we interact in this world. It broke everything. And so to say that the bottom line of this is that sin is sort of the result, or the root result of sin is separation, that we are pulled apart. The thing that got separated more than anything else is us. We got separated from God, and we got separated from Him as the source of our life, which only leaves death. And then what we have sort of become as a culture is we are masters in the art of separation. We can separate anything from anything else. We can reduce things down. We can put people in precise groups and say, that person is that, and that person is that, and those people are that. And what we typically do is we sort of pin them around the issues that we like or agree with, and we sort of set this up, and then we call everybody else who's not in our camp those people. And it depends on whatever issue you're talking about, right? Those people can't drive. If you've ever been around people like that, they just can't drive. Those people can't think. Those people don't care about this. Those people are trying to ruin our country. Those people are socialist. Those people are racist. Those people are, and the list goes on and on and on. We've become masters at doing this. You cannot hear a conversation in our culture hardly without those delineations being made and then pressed on. We've just sort of pulled each other apart, and then we just demolish each other, and then we come out and we cry for unity, right? We should all have unity. And in fact, I watched the inauguration this past week, and I saw Joe Biden say that the most elusive thing in a democracy, right, is unity. And I'm going to emails, I can't believe you mentioned Biden, you're such a liberal. And I saw all the conservative people come out and say, you can't have unity because that's what checks and balances is for. I read all the stuff. But it's interesting that everybody's kind of talking about this, and we're all trying to figure out where unity, what we think is, if we can just get everybody to believe the same thing here, then the world will be as it should be. And most of our efforts are here. And what I want to suggest to you is what Jesus tells us or calls us into is something very, very different. And this is why I think this is the opportunity that we have as a church. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be a little bit sort of abstract. There's going to be some things you're going to hear that are familiar to you, and you're going to go, yes, I've heard that, but it's still hard for me to kind of understand or grab hold of it. And then I'm going to try to make it really, really practical, both in what you can do in your own relationship with God and what you can do with the things that are right in front of you. That's my aim today. But we're going to talk about this idea of together and how that affects how we treat those people. How would Jesus have us treat those people? It's not a secret. I've been sharing this with you guys for some time, but there are passages in the Bible that I like more than others. And what I've found as I've gotten older, I used to think because that was just the Bible and that's what the Bible said, but what I found is the passages that I tend to like more than others are the ones that already affirm what I already believe. Those are a lot more fun to preach on. Those are a lot more fun to tell other people about. So what I do, and there's been a long saying, I've read the Gospels many, many times in my life. And what I try to notice in my own life, is when I find myself shying away from passages or just not liking them. And I'm ashamed to admit this, but Jesus has this final prayer in John chapter 17. It's where we get to eavesdrop on Jesus talking to God about us. And I don't like it. And I've always wrestled with, why do I not love this prayer? Why do I not love this? And the reason is because it pushes on me in some directions that I don't necessarily care to go. It actually helps or shapes or pushes me to consider those people differently than I already do. And to be honest, those people already know them, and I'm not really sure I like them, and so if they just say those people, I don't have any responsibility to them. And Jesus seems to say otherwise. So that's what John 17 is. That's what John 17 is all about. That somehow, that we're not gonna find this fix over here. There's gonna be something else that has to happen. We're not gonna just because what we say is, if those people just believed like I do about these things, then the world would be redeemed. It would be as it should be. So what I do, and I've shared this before, I take my Bible and I print it off, not because I'm spiritual, but because I have attention problems. And so I print it off, and this is John 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, and I spread them out on my desk or sometimes on the floor, and I just discipline myself in this, and I just read the whole thing. I just try to imagine what it was like to sit down at the Last Supper with Jesus and hear all the exchange that Jesus and Peter and the disciples made in those moments, and to think about what it was like for Judas to get up, and just to think about what it was like in those moments, and just to read it like that, to let myself enter into it. And then more importantly, to let sort of those words kind of read me. And so it just takes time. It takes a little bit of discipline, but I print them out. Then I begin to mark things. Like in John 10, I notice how he says sheep, so I have them marked in green. Then I have these little marks all around it. I notice there's some questions he asks us in 13. I marked places where he talks about the Holy Spirit. I marked in John 15, he talks about abiding and remaining, so I mark all those. And then I see in John 17, he talks a lot about the world. He talks a lot about oneness and unity. And so I just have spent the last 2 years just marking it up, asking questions, and answering questions. And that's how I do that. So what you're getting today is my own personal challenge, that because I don't like to feel challenged alone, I'm just gonna bother everybody with it. Is that fair? So Jesus is praying for us, and we get to hear this. We get to think about this. And what he's talking about is this idea of togetherness. And the thing that I want for you to understand about what I'm trying to get across to our church is two things. Number one is that togetherness always has a trajectory. Every time you interact with another person, it moves towards something. Every conversation you have, every engagement you have, every email you send, everything that you do has the potential to move a relationship in a direction. You can contribute to healing and wholeness and hope and helpfulness, or you can derail things. It's not hard to do. Derailing things is actually really easy. But I'm just saying that we just have to be aware. You have to be aware that every time you're together with another person, there is a trajectory involved. Notice this when you're together with groups, when you're with friends, how the conversations go. Notice where things tend to go. The second thing is, and this is just my resolve, there's plenty of blame to go around. I could sit up here and rail about why we are in the place we is, and those people said this, and if those people would stop doing that, then we would all be much better off. But I'm just done with that. I'm not going to blame anybody. Well, instead, what I'm doing, what I'm going to ask you to do is to simply to take responsibility for what happens when you are together with other people. I cannot control what everybody else is doing. I can do something about what I do when I'm with other people. And I'm saying that togetherness simply requires, if we're going to do this in the way of Jesus, it just requires responsibility. It requires responsibility. You take responsibility for what you contribute to the relationships that you have, to the conversations that you have, to the engagements that you have. It's just, I don't know how to say it any clearer. I think if we did that, if just a few of us did that, it would make a massive difference in the world around us. So here's how Jesus prays. And he says, I love how he introduced, he says, this prayer is not for the folks who are just sitting in this room, but this prayer is for everybody who's going to believe in me because of their message, which is us. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is us. So he's praying for you and for me. He says, I'm praying for these folks. And here's what he prays in John chapter 17, verse 21. He says, I pray that all of them may be one. That all of them may sort of find this place of togetherness where they exist in unity, in a singularness. Father, he's praying, all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. And what you begin to notice here, he makes this very relational. He makes this very personal in this. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. May this relationship that my people have with me, that we have together, it's going to be a voice to the world. The world's going to know something about you by what they see in us. That's frankly why I didn't like this prayer, because I don't want to be on the hook for what those people think. I'm good with me and my little crew because we all think the same, but everybody else, not so much. And when you put more than like 7 people together, you're going to have chaos. You're going to have lots of different ideas and lots of different thoughts on lots of different things. And therein is the challenge. And what we buy into is that if we can just get together on all the issues, then the world will see and know. But he's like, nope, that's not it. If we can get together on our allegiance to Jesus and his way and his rule, then something begins to happen. And not until then. And not until then. I have given them the glory, verse 22. I have given them the glory that you gave to me, that they may be one as we are one. Do you see a theme here? Me and you and me, they may be one, we may be one, so the world's going to see I and them and you and me, so they may be brought into this place of complete unity. Then the world will know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I want for those that you have given me to be with me where I am. I want for there to be this intimacy there. And I want them to see my glory, the glory that you have given me because you have loved me before the creation of the world. There's something much bigger than what we see in front of us going on here. And here's how he concludes this prayer. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and they know that you have sent me. This group, this people who are one know that you have sent me. And here's this promise. I have made you known to them, and I will continue to make you known to them. And if you write in your Bibles, this is what I'd underline. I would continue to make you known to them. Jesus is continually making the Father known to me for 2 reasons. Number 1, in order that the love that he has for me may be, that he has for Jesus may be in me. So number one is he is reminding me, he's revealing to me God's love for me. Jesus is revealing to you God's love for you. And number two, that I myself may be in them. He is also revealing his presence and his closeness to you. Your relationship with Christ, life with God, your walk with God is always using or being used to reveal God's love for you, and he's being reminded of God's closeness to you. The reason this is so important is because this is the source from which we draw life. This is also the thing which we actually gather around. Last week, I demonstrated to you that it is possible that what we gather around actually can make everything else pale in comparison to what we are beholding in front of us. And I told you that when you see Journey in concert, nothing else matters. And everybody says amen to that. We know that to be true. For just a moment. So the other thing that I want to ask you today is there or are there, let's just make it singular, is there a relationship that you can enter into that shapes or frames or affects every other relationship that you have? And if you are married, you should say yes. You enter into a relationship that you can no longer be like you were because that relationship drives everything else. When I tell people this, I remind them every wedding I do, I said one of the keys to marriage is you got to understand that marriage is singular. It's not you and you, it's y'all. What you do affects you and what you do affects you. That is true for the rest of your life. That relationship drives and governs and affects everything else. And this is exactly why I think Paul, when he's writing about this, he says the way in which God's people interact with God is similar to, or is a metaphor, he uses the metaphor of marriage for that because it is a relationship that shapes and changes and affects everything else. What our life with God is like, it has a trajectory and we are always moving, as difficult as it is, towards one another. If you are walking with God, if you are having a relationship with Christ and he is not leading you towards other people, there's something missing in your relationship with Christ. Most of us are going to gravitate toward yes people. Most of us are going to gravitate towards people who already agree with us. He is drawing us into a place where we live together. And what I'm asking us to do together, I started this last week, I'm going to continue this today, is to sort of enter in and say, God, what is it you want from us? If we're going to say to you that you are our Lord and you are our King and our allegiance is to you, there's a responsibility that falls on us to live under his rule and under his way. And this starts with us trying to say, God, what is it that you are longing to do in the world? How is it that you reconcile all things to yourself? And this starts with a prayer. We talked about this last week, the most difficult prayer. God, break my heart for what breaks yours. I fully understand that a lot of us our hearts are broken over a lot of things that have happened to us, and it is not as though God does not care about those. What I'm speaking of is something a little bit bigger or larger than that, to say, God, what is it that you see that harms, that your heart breaks over, and how do we get in on that? God, break my heart for what breaks yours. Let me see the world through your eyes. Let me get to this place and so I can see this instead of trying to figure out how to make this right and look like I think it ought to look. And what you realize is that the only way that our passion for reconciliation is awakened is to have our hearts broken over a broken relationship. The broken relationships that we have in this world, that's what breaks God's heart. That people are separated from one another, they divide one another. We do this to one another. That our work has become sort of a posture of proving our worth or idolatry or whatever those things are. These are things that we don't have a right relationship. We're not rightly related. There is no shalom. That's what we're longing for. That's what we want. And what I believe has happened in this, and what I think the charge or challenge for us, and I think it is the hope, when we think about the hope of the world, what you begin to understand is the redemption of the world isn't because we solve its problems. The redemption of the world is only going to happen through the relationships that we have with those people. And this is where it's going to get really, really tough and really, really hard on all of us. And there's a place we're going to start, but I want to hold on just a second longer. Last week, I think this is where the hope of the world actually is. I've heard this for years. I believe this, and I'm just coming to understand it more and more fully, that the church really is the hope of the world. Whenever those people gather around things, what they do is they gather around issues, and then they become known for that thing, and that's what they say to the world. And the church has long gathered around things, and the people of the world thinks, oh, this is the message of the church. They hate this group, or they hate that group, or they don't like this, or they expect me to be like this. And what I'm saying is the way in which we gather, the way in which we live has an opportunity to say something to a watching world. Are we saying what God intends for us to say? Are we demonstrating the way that God intends for us to demonstrate to the world that is desperate for this? One of the things that's interesting is unity is not going to happen here. What Jesus says is when we do this, we find unity here. So all of our relationships are moving towards one another, and all of our relationships with one another are always moving us towards intimacy with Christ. And in that is our hope to experience intimacy with one another. And this is really, really, really important. 1 John chapter 4 says this. Jesus says it like this, that all who declare that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is who he says he is, they have God living in them and they live in God. That's Jesus' answer to prayer. We know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love. I guess it's not up there. And we have put our trust in his love. This is an echo of what Jesus just prayed in John chapter 17, that our relationship somehow reminds us of God's love for us. We put our trust in that, and then we give that to one another. I've talked about the idea of community. What happens in this politic, this thing that we gather around is everything. I mentioned this last week. I'm gonna put it on the screen again. It's sort of a paraphrase from Megan Good, and it's this: our politic, the idea that we rally around is the lordship of Jesus, is that Jesus is Lord. And this politic is fleshed out in the church where we voluntarily give our allegiance to Jesus and we live under the rule of his love. The thing that we gather around to declare that Jesus is our Lord, and that we voluntarily give our allegiance to him in every. We're going to talk more detail about this, because I know everybody's going, what about? We're going to talk about that. But I want us to get here first. And so here's what I think that we can do. Community is a word that gets thrown around a lot. I want to define this very clearly, because what we're talking about when we're together and we experience community is this, that community is this relational space. It's the place where we interact with one another, where God's love is exchanged, where it's experienced and ultimately gets expressed. That when you are in community with someone, they are breathing worth and value into your soul because they have been first loved by God. They are sourced, they are reminded that God's love for them, and we offer that to one another. We receive it from them and then we give it back. And some of you have been in relationships like that. Some of you have been in relationships where you just feel like that person made you or caused you or made you feel alive. Others of you have been in relationships where people just suck the life out of you. So if we know what one is like, we need to learn what the other is like. And the reality is, we contribute to that. We get a say in that. I get to say, there are people who are always going to be kind of takers. I get to decide what I want to contribute to that conversation, what trajectory that's going to go in. But you got to be on your toes, you got to be on your game, you got to be reminded, you got to be walking with the Lord in these moments. And he's calling us together. This right here is the miracle, and it is more costly to our own personal freedoms and rights and all the things. It's more costly than we know. This is why the Bible is full of language that says, bear with one another, put up with one another, forgive one another, right? Be humble, consider others more important than yourself. These are all the language that God uses for us to deal with each other. Why? Because that's just what we require in order to live like this. This is extraordinarily difficult. So here's what happens. And I want to be really, really specific on this. So I've been thinking about, so what do we do? This is all kind of a theory, what do we do? Well, here's what I would say we do. And we're going to continue this next week, but this is the best I can do in the time I have today. Number one, or the principle is this: if you're going to learn how to do this, you have to get local and you have to get personal. When I hear all the chaos of all the headlines in our national politics, my rule of thumb is I get local and I get personal. I talk about the people that I know, and I talk about the things that are happening in front of me. You get local and you get personal. And let me tell you why this is so important, because if you don't stay local, what happens is you will inevitably kind of start to get distanced. You will start to pull away. You'll start to see things from a distance, which is not always bad, but ultimately what happens is we become removed from the effect of those things, and then we can just sort of make comments and questions, and we can do all this stuff as sort of a commentary without having any personal responsibility to the thing. To be local means you have skin in the game. To be personal means that you know someone. Think about this. If you're not personal, you become impersonal, which is low-hanging fruit when you're sort of playing the antonym game. And I begin to think about this, but if it's that, what happens when you take and you pull someone's person from them? You make them an object, and the word we love in our culture, when you are not personal, you become objective. And people think that's a good thing. I'm objective. And what they mean is that they see the facts for what they are. And what we end up doing is we end up debating this tangled mess of facts that are not designed to bring us the truth, but they're actually designed to conceal the truth from us. You realize people use facts in all kinds of different ways. The facts and the truth are two different things. In fact, what Jesus did is quite interesting. He did not make the facts information. He made them a person. He did not make the truth information. He made it a person. I am the way. I am the truth. What God is always doing is relational. It's always personal. It's always local. That's what he's doing. We've got to get our eyes on this. I'll give you an example, and this is one, I don't want you to read too much into this, but there's a lot of chaos around the vaccine, and you've probably seen this. The national headlines are, the vaccine rollout has been nowhere nearly as good as it was promised, and everybody's dropping the ball, blah, blah, blah. And you know what's happening? They're all blaming Donald Trump for not doing it fast enough, and they're blaming Joe Biden. That's going to be the headlines for the next however long, right? You know it's going to happen. And what I'm telling you, and I keep trying to say this, y'all are trying to guess which side. I'm not either of those sides. I'm trying to help us understand what it's like to live in the kingdom. This is a fundamentally different way to live. But that's the headline, and is it true? Yes, here's what some of our friends, they had taken care of their elderly parents, and we're seeing how hard it was to get an appointment. We had to call 100 times to get an appointment to the thing. Now, that's easy to get on Facebook and go, I can't believe you got to do 100 times and get everybody all fired up about it. Or you can contribute to the healing. We recognize this is difficult. Does anyone else need help doing this? We had several elderly folks who've reached out. And this group of folks just said, hey, we'll sit down, we'll get an appointment for you. We don't have any connections, but we'll get an appointment for you. And we get an appointment and then call them up and say, hey, can we help you get an appointment? We got you an appointment, we'll put your stuff in, it's coming. Hey, your appointment's at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Do you guys drive at night? We don't drive at night, we'll get you a ride. Now there's like 15 or 20 people who are helping other folks get appointments and then get rides to get their vaccine. And you can say all the headlines are all the chaos, but we're doing something about this right here and with these people. And it changes the way you see the world. It changes how you get sucked into all these distant arguments. Instead of going, this is my experience. Yes, this is happening, but here's what we're doing about it. It's personal and it's local, and this is how you have to do it. This is exactly how Jesus came to us and how he calls us to live. And this is where I want to turn the corner and close our time together. We're going to talk more about that next week. But I want to mention something or share something with you that I've noticed for a long time, but I don't know that I've ever considered it to be as profound as what it really is. I think a lot of us have read the Bible for a long time, perhaps, and you've heard things, and so you just sort of think about things the way you've always thought of them, and they just sound sort of cliche, or they sound kind of nice, or maybe it was a memory verse or a little thing you posted on Instagram, so it's just a cool thing, and we don't really take it to heart. And one of these is found in John 13. John 13, Jesus has served the Last Supper, and he's telling his disciples that he's going away. Now, Jesus is a rabbi. In Jewish culture, this is a person who stewards the teachings of the Torah, the commands. And their job mostly is to basically interpret the commands that are already given to them in the Old Covenant. There are 600 plus commands in the Old Covenant. And so they all knew. They knew the big 10, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not have no other gods. They knew all the big 10. But there's 600 others besides this. And so Jesus comes in, and this is what he says to them. He says, listen to this, in John 13, 34 and 35, a new command I give you, love one another. Now, most all of them had known this, and most all of them had probably heard the golden rule, right? You know what the golden rule is? You heard this in kindergarten. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, that's actually kind of interesting because everybody knows how they want to be treated. That's an easy kind of low-hanging fruit. Jesus actually ups the ante on this. He says, a new command I give you. They're like, whoa, a new command. This is different. This is one that actually replaces the other ones. A new command I give you, love one another. And look what he says. As I have loved you, so you love one another. As I have loved you, so you love one another. And by this, all men will know that you are followers of me. They'll know that you are my disciples by the thing that you gather around and say to the world around you. By the way, you love one another. Piece of cake, right? So how do you love those people? Jesus, help me to love them. How do I do that? You know what he says? Simple. You love them as I have loved you. You know what the problem is? A lot of us don't really know how Jesus has loved us. We don't know how Jesus has loved, I don't know how Jesus has loved me. If you were to ask me, I've been married 28 years. I told you I'm married to Joy. This morning she's love. She got a sweater on that says love in honor of this message, I suppose. But there are things about my wife that I'm learning over the years. And it's taken a long time to get through my thick skull at times. But there are things, if you said, how does Julie love you? I can give you a list. And so when you say, Mike, I want you to love other people the way Julie loves you, I know how to do it. It's hard, but at least I have a picture in my head. If you said, Mike, love others the way Richie loves you, I can say Richie tells me the truth about things. Richie is not bothered by my impatience sometimes. Richie steps into those things. This is how Richie confronts me. I can tell you how those things happen. And so Jesus comes along and he says, I want you to love others the way I have loved you. The first priority when we come to God is not where does he stand on this issue or this thing. The first priority when you come to Jesus is how have you loved me? You know why? Because if you understand that, you'll know what to do. When I think about this is what Jesus is praying for. That when he says, me and you and me, he's like, when this relationship occurs, he's going to teach you and reveal to you and remind you of God's love for you and his closeness. It's interesting. When Jesus said, you love the way I've loved you, he made it personal and he made it local. He didn't leverage his platform. He didn't leverage his position as being God. He made it relational. You want to know how to treat people? You treat them the way I've treated you. You do what I've done for you. You do that to other people. He made it relational. This is the way God is. I think of this as this picture of communion. We often think of communion as like the Lord's Supper, and it is. But communion is a way of life. It's a way for us to dwell, to remain, to abide in him, to experience constant communion, that when we are with him and we sense him, he's reminding us of God's love for us. He's not condemning you. He's not shaming you. He's reminding you of God's love for you, that God has put up with me over and over when I promised not to do something and did it again. When I swore I wouldn't say this, and I said it again. When I thought I would do this, and I did, he's been with me. He's been patient with me. He's formed me. He's shaped me. I begin to understand and lean into those things. To love other people the way he loves us require us to get deeply personal with him. For some of you, you struggle to receive God's love because you don't think you're worthy. You think you've done something or caused something or something has been done to you that has sort of brought such shame to you that you feel like you're unworthy. And the very nature of God's love is that it breathes worth and value into your soul. He breathes life. He restores the dead places and he causes them to come back to life. We're going to close with this song, and the reason is because I love this song, one, but it's the picture of it. It takes communion, and it just makes it seem like the life we long to live. Me and you and you and me. Me and you and you and me. And what I want for you to do, to experience, to kind of ponder is I just want to remain with you. I want to have a communion with you, Father, to abide in you, to your Son to abide in me. And not to worry about all these other things yet, because when we understand how we've been loved, it will shape and frame the way in which we love others, and we can trust him with that. And the picture in this, he says that in this place back in the garden, he uses the imagery of the garden, in the garden, that there was this place where we were meant to be. It was oh so simple. It was easy to love. There was no space between us. There was no distance. It was easy to trust. He is so close. He is so personal. And he invites us to remain in him. And he will remain in us in this perfect place of communion. And from that relationship, there's a way in which it affects every other one. Could that be what the world is actually longing for? I believe it is. And it gets said through us. Father, my prayer in this moment is that we would just pause and let all the things that we feel and are burdened by and are fearful of, are frustrated by, are angered over, that they would dissipate because we are together around you. That, Father, we would hear these words and see this picture unfold before us. This is communion, the place where we are fully known and fully loved. And that what your Spirit is doing in this moment is reminding us that we are loved and reminding us that you are close. And God, that relationship would be the governing model of every other one that we have. Father, though we may not know what to do about what's happening in the national headlines, we can know what to do with the people that are right in front of us. So I ask that you would use us to that end and use this moment to sort of seal and to bring hope and to shape us. Father, I lift this name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King.